Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I would like to say that I'm very pleased to be here and to see such a large number of people that are interested in the topic of adoption. I had to think hard about what to say in an opening address that is supposed to concern the future of adoption. And so I decided to do exactly what Rose hoped somebody might do, and that is to take us through the recent treaty body reporting processes insofar as they pertain to adoption in particular, but not exclusively, as you will see. And I will later on alert you to where you can find the relevant documentation if you want to go and study it yourself in more detail. After I've looked at the CRC reporting process, I will look very briefly at the process of reporting to the African Committee of Experts on the Rights of the Child, which actually occurred earlier. And then I want to say a few things about the Hague Permanent Bureau and about the 1993 Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of Intercountry Adoption. And I will conclude with some recommendations, and then I will open the floor for any questions. So some of you might be familiar with some of the issues that I'll be raising, but hopefully this will set the scene for a fruitful discussion for the next 3 days. I will be leaving just after lunch, so if anybody wants to speak to me in tea time, you find me always outside by the smoking section. Unfortunately. So I'm going to start with the CRC process, and I'm going to proceed from the basis that many of you are unfamiliar with the process and what it entails, and what the various steps were that led up to the government report being presented in September of this year. Just very briefly, South Africa ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1995, shortly after the first democratic elections. It was the very first international treaty that this country ratified. Previously, we were not allowed to ratify any human rights treaties because we had been kicked out of the United Nations because of apartheid. So it is actually significant that the CRC was chosen by the then Minister of Justice, Dalla Omar, as the first treaty that South Africa would ratify. It could have been, for instance, CEDAW, the Treaty Against Discrimination Against Women, or it could have been the Treaty Against Racial Discrimination, both of which we have subsequently ratified, but it wasn't. It was the Children's Rights Treaty. We submitted our first report under that treaty in 1997. As required, the first report must be submitted within 2 years of ratification, and that report was considered by the CRC committee in the year 2000. Thereafter, as Rose well knows, there was a long hiatus, and the various reporting periods lapsed. The subsequent reports are due every 5 years, so we missed 2002, we missed 2007, we missed 2012. But under Dr. September's auspices, a combined second, third, and fourth periodic report was ultimately put together and submitted to the CRC committee in December 2014. The CRC, of course, is a very busy committee, the CRC committee, because of the very large number of state parties that have ratified it. It's the most ratified treaty in the world. Only the US remains to ratify the treaty and won't do so. And so there's a period of time between submission of the report and scheduling it for consideration. But ultimately, the report was scheduled for consideration in September of this year. Now, in the reporting structure, the cluster that adoption falls under is called Family, Environment and Alternative Care. This covers a range of articles in the CRC. For instance, and I'm just highlighting a few here, periodic review of placements, foster care, temporary placement of children and child and youth care centres, and adoption. But in addition, there's a whole number of other issues that are generally considered under family, environment and alternative care. So it's a cluster, one of the 8 clusters under which a report must be structured. Now, if we go to the Government of South Africa report of December 2014 and we look at what was said about adoption, the government acknowledges the low numbers of adoption relative to the numbers of children in need of permanent care, and figures were given, a figure of 2,200 approximately per annum between 2001 and 2010, of which 10% were children who were adopted internationally. And then attached to that government report, the country report, was a table, table 27, which gives the number of local adoptions, and I've just reproduced it for you here. This is publicly available information. The number of local adoptions, the number of international adoptions, and the total number of adoptions per year from 2003 to 2010. Now, the process that follows the submission of the government report is that civil society organizations are invited to submit an alternative report or complementary report. People don't like the old-fashioned word shadow report because it's not in the shadows anymore. So a consortium, of which there are people in the audience today, of a large number of organizations representing a huge variety of sectors, from disability to education, to refugee children, to child protection, got together and in quite a lot of haste, actually, because the time wasn't that much that was allocated, drafted a complementary report to supplement the information given by government. And they presented this complementary report in Geneva to the CRC committee at its session in February of this year. So I just want to take you through what the NGO report says. The NGO reports are not always available on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. In some countries, there's a lot of political interference with NGOs, and so they can't speak out freely, and they can't authorize their reports to be placed in the public domain. But in the case of South Africa, the CSO report is on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It follows the same structure as the government report in terms of following the cluster approach, and so you can go and consult it, but for your ease of reference, I have simply copied the relevant parts for adoption on the next slide. So the CSO report, paragraph 139, says the following: there is uncertainty regarding the register backup procedures. The purpose of the register is to facilitate matching available adoptable children with respect to the adoptive parents. It is not clear whether every adoptable child and adoptive parent must be placed on RACAP, or only if they cannot be matched. Where the placement on RACAP is mandatory is significant, as the time periods prescribed for children placed on RACAP may significantly delay the conclusion of an adoption. And then a further comment of the consortium relating to adoption is that only South African citizens or permanent residents may be placed on RACAP as prospective adoptive parents, which prevents foreign citizens from who are working in South Africa on valid permits from adopting children. The CSO report continued to say that the department's statistics, government statistics, as provided in table 26, now I know that two slides ago said table 27, so this is clearly an error, it should have been table 27, are outdated and do not reflect the sudden decrease in adoptions that occurred in 2010 when the Children's Act came into operation. This drop in adoptions between 2010 and 2012 and the low adoption rates in subsequent years are concerning given the high number of orphans, and they quote the figure of approximately 3.36 million orphans in 2013. And I know you will be getting an update on similar figures later in the course of today. The CSOs then also attached their own annexure, Annexure 7, where they took material from the adoption register and showed the disparity between adoption figures before implementation of the Children's Act. And you can see these were running at around 2,500 to 2,200 per annum, to after the implementation of the Children's Act, where they have virtually halved. And they gave figures up until the end of 2014. Now, the process that follows the meeting in Geneva between the NGOs and the Committee on the Rights of the Child is that the committee uses the information, the supplementary information obtained from the CSOs to develop what is called a list of issues, LOI, which is a set of questions to the government of the Republic of South Africa to update material, to reflect on any new developments that have occurred since they submitted the report, and any other questions of concern to the committee. And in particular, one committee member is appointed as the lead person on a particular country. And it wouldn't be a South African, obviously, and nor is it the chair because he is Ethiopian, but he lives in South Africa. So let's see what the list of issues, which was developed by the committee, had to say about our interest of today, which is adoption. This was issued on the 11th of March 2016 and is equally available on the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights website. Government was asked in one section to please provide information on efforts made to monitor the situation of children in kinship care or children adopted through customary adoptions. And then in another section where the request comes for additional data, the government was asked to provide data disaggregated by age, sex, socioeconomic background, geographic location, and nationality regarding the situation of children deprived of a family environment. And then specifically to please indicate for the past 3 years the number of children separated from parents, living in child-in households, placed in institutions disaggregated by the length of placement, placed with foster families, and finally adopted domestically or through inter-country adoptions. All of these fall then within that cluster, that reporting cluster, children deprived of a family environment. So from this one can see that the committee has its eye on the place of adoption, domestic and in the country, in the overarching child protection system that Rose has already alluded to. So government then had from March until around about the end of July to respond to the list of issues. And I've just mentioned the ones that are relevant to adoption. I haven't talked about birth registration, or refugee and migrant children, or disability, or any of the other questions that government was asked to respond to. So in respect of these specific questions, question 1 on efforts made to monitor the situation of children in kinship care or adopted through customary adoptions was not answered at all. And in response to that other question about disaggregated data, I haven't given you the information about child-headed households and children placed in institutional care, which information has been challenged by the NGOs anyway because it's impossible to work out in relation to children placed in child or youth care centres, where they are, how long they've been there, how long their stay is. The data just doesn't make any sense. But that's a separate topic for maybe a little bit later. So in respect of the second question, E, the children adopted domestically or through inter-country adoptions, government gave the information for 2012, 2013, and for 2014, 2015, and linked it to the financial year. And here Dr. Marby will have to explain the difference between the financial year that the departments are referring to and the information given by the CSO 6 months earlier, which might relate to an annual reporting period or something different, I don't know, because the information isn't actually the same. It's in the same ballpark, but it's not quite the same. And that I reflect in the CSO table. And furthermore, just to note that that information on numbers was not disaggregated by age, which is extremely relevant in inter-country adoption, by gender, which may or may not be relevant, by disability, which is extremely relevant in relation to adoption, and by reference to the child's possible relationship to the adoptive parent, and I'm thinking here specifically of step-parent adoptions. Certainly, from my knowledge of the past, pre the Children's Act, the vast majority of adoptions, of those 2,500 odd adoptions, more than 80% were actually step-parent adoptions. So we don't know to what extent that ratio remains constant as of now. And I think it's really important that we think carefully about the disaggregation of data, because it tends to show whether older children, children with disabilities are the ones being adopted, or whether it is in fact very young children who are being adopted, and this can provide quite important comparative material for other countries. Now government, before I continue here, the CSO supplementary input, which followed in August 26, did actually address adoption. I'll just put it on the wrong slide, I'll come back to it. But it had much more to say about kinship care and grants, and I'll come back to that again. But the next slide shows you what the CSO response was to the government's response to the list of issues. So it's a to and fro. And this was submitted in August 2016. It's also available publicly on the internet. It's much shorter than the initial report that CSO submitted, because it just responds to a few issues. So what did CSOs say? They said they're concerned that DSD's difficult bureaucratic requirements for adoption have led to, this is a quote, so this is not my words, I've just cut and pasted, a substantial decrease in the number of adoptions. Administrative delays on the part of DSD result in some children waiting up to 6 months in alternative care before being placed in a family environment, raising concerns around early attachment. And maybe that concern even came from somebody who's sitting in this room. I don't know, maybe you recognize your own words there. The CSOs also addressed the issue of RACA. They recommended that the DSC policy regarding RACA should be clarified in law, and they recommended that bureaucratic processes that delay adoptions must be streamlined. I didn't put this on a slide, but I also want to alert you to the fact that there were other individual civil society submissions in relation to South Africa, and I did go through all of them on the internet. There's one from Lawyers for Human Rights, there's one from Human Rights Watch, which concentrates mainly on rural education. But the one that's relevant to this field is a submission from the Institute for Social Services, ISS, on children and alternative care. They try and do a briefing on every country that submits a country report to the CRC committee, and they did one also for South Africa. So that two-pager you can also find on the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights website under South Africa, and it also alerts you to the fact that internationally there are organs of civil society that are watching the alternative care system in South Africa in all of its facets. They also mention adoption, inter-country adoption, foster care, kinship care, and various other components of alternative care. So, the million-dollar question is, what did the CRC committee say about adoption in its final observations, which are called concluding observations, to the South African government, which were released a couple of weeks ago by email, but officially they were published a very short while ago on the website on the 26th of October. The answer is that the committee did not say anything that I could think was directly applicable to adoption, despite what they'd raised earlier in the list of issues. They did, however, ask for the expedited revision of the Social Assistance Act aimed at introducing an extended support grant for families caring for orphans while ensuring an adequate and feasible monitoring mechanism. And on the way here this morning, I happened to hear on the radio, in the little lorry that brought me here, that a bill was introduced to Cabinet yesterday to provide for various amendments to the Social Assistance Act, one of which concerns the question of orphans, but obviously I haven't had a chance to study it, and we also don't know how long it's going to take in Cabinet and Parliament before it becomes a reality. I must point out, though, that the CRC committee raised very many concerns about other aspects of children deprived of the family environment, particularly in relation to foster care, which you will know about, the failing foster care system, and the question of distinguishing properly between kinship care and foster care. The concluding observations are obviously, to repeat myself, also available if you want to study them further. Before I come to my own concluding observations, I would like to just go to the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Government pleasingly submitted its report to the African Committee of Experts before it submitted its report to the CRC Committee. That report was considered in 2015 and concluding observations were issued. There was also a process of hearing the civil society report and so forth, but I'm only going to focus on what the committee said about adoption. The committee commends the state party for various measures undertaken to improve domestic adoption. The committee recommends that the state party to use the guidelines for action on inter-country adoption in Africa, which were adopted at a conference in Addis Ababa in November 2012 and were subsequently endorsed as the policy applicable in Africa by the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and in particular to strengthen its measures in relation to inter-country adoption. And I'll come back to the reporting process under the African Charter in a few minutes, my few remaining minutes. Now I'm turning to the third treaty that is relevant in this field, and that is the Adoption Convention of 1993. Now, it is a completely different kind of treaty. It is not a UN-based treaty, and there is no reporting mechanism. No country that ratifies the Adoption Convention has to submit any form of report on how it's faring, because the Hague Conference on Private International Law, which is the governing body established nearly 150 years ago to regulate the international aspects of private law, including posts and telecommunications and international contracts and various other things that have got nothing to do, little to do with children. The Hague Conference on Private International is an intergovernmental organization. The members are governments themselves. There's no UN that sits on top. And the South African government is in fact a long-standing member of the Hague Conference on Private International Law. So how does the implementation of this treaty, this particular treaty, and some of the others related to children that you might be aware of, like the Treaty on Child Abduction, how does it work? It works in that the members get together every 5 years, the members of the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and they have a special session, which usually takes 2 weeks, where they will have sent out a number of briefing papers beforehand, where they will have identified possibly a theme for the special session, and the countries that are members of that treaty, as well as countries that are interested in becoming members of that treaty, will then pitch up in The Hague, which is where the Hague Conference on Private International Law is hosted, and will have a 2-week in-depth working session. There are also, in between these 5-year working sessions, there are working committees on various aspects. And at the moment, the principal one in the field of adoption is a working group on illicit practice in adoption, which was set up a couple of years ago. And its last meeting was, in fact, less than 2 weeks ago in The Hague, consisting of 22 individuals. From looking at the photograph on the website of the Hague Permanent Bureau, they seem to represent the major regions of the world. But I looked very closely and I couldn't spot any South Africans that I knew there. So these working groups are really important because they lead to the development of new policy. They lead to the development of so-called guides to good practice, of which there are 2 on adoption and inter-country adoption. And they also lead to the definition of how the next special session is going to turn out. Now, I was the country representative at the inter-country adoption special session of 2010, because everybody else in South Africa was watching World Cup soccer, and I'm not particularly fond of soccer, so I was able to go and represent South Africa there. And 2010 was also significant because it was the first time that there had been a sizable delegation of people at the special session from African countries, because Africa had become a hotspot for illicit practice in inter-country adoption. The second special session that I'm aware of is 2015, and unfortunately South Africa did not attend the special session, and I have some comments to make about that. I know there are budget constraints and so forth, but there is no other way of interfacing with counterparts in other countries if you don't go to the special session. Very important that the Guide to Good Practice number 1 emphasizes that national adoption must have the same standards and safeguards as inter-country adoption, pointing out at the same time that often there are actually higher standards in inter-country adoption than there are in domestic adoption. I also wanted to just allude to the fact that South Africa did not, as far as I can remember, fill in the questionnaire for the 2015 special session, which is what other countries rely on for updated information on practices, on policies, on developments, and even on telephone numbers. The online information on South Africa dates back to 2010, whilst the Children's Act implementation was still in its infancy, and adoption organizations had not yet even been accredited. Also, in connection with the Hague Convention, I would like to allude to some regional activity. The Hague Permanent Bureau, which is the secretariat that runs all the work in between these 5 yearly sessions, was able to persuade DIRCO to host a regional conference here in Pretoria in 2009 to try and interest African countries in becoming more active and to ratify more of the treaties. The similar kind of much smaller scale regional workshop was held in Cape Town last year, attended by Dr. Mabe and Kinsey, and by counterparts from Zambia, Ethiopia, Swaziland, and Namibia. And I must point out that after that workshop that we had in Cape Town, Namibia and Zambia both ratified the Inter-Country Adoption Convention, so there was some impact. Swaziland and Lesotho are also recent signatories. The Permanent Bureau is extremely keen to extend its reach in Africa, also due to the vast migration that is happening across the globe and the melting of boundaries and the fact that people are moving so much. And so there would be huge support for any initiatives to affect regional collaboration. And that brings me to my last few slides, which are my very tentative recommendations seen in the light of everything I've said so far about the treaty body reporting system and about the interplay between the UN system and Permanent Bureau of the Hague Conference. The first recommendation, conclusion, or suggestion I have is that I realize that this conference is focused on adoption, but the treaty bodies are absolutely clear that the child protection system must be seen as intertwined. It's part of an overarching alternative care system. So foster care, kinship care, whatever grants are available, placement of children and child and youth care centres come into the equation. They are quite clear that adoption has been bedeviled to a large extent by an unwieldy foster care, kinship care system, and the grants that are allowed to the one and are not allowed to the other. I do want to make an off-the-record statement here that I don't believe that the argument that adoption is culturally inappropriate holds water anymore. We had some discussions about that in Cape Town last year with counterparts from other African countries like Swaziland and Zambia, and it's perfectly possible with good marketing and awareness to increase the appropriateness of adoption in an African context. I would also say that adoption has been impacted by the intractable semi-permanency of children's placements in child and youth care centres. Although there's very little data available, I personally was involved in a study last year, which has been published in the Potchefstroom Electronic Law Review in June this year, which is a study of unaccompanied foreign children in child and youth care centres in the entire Western Cape province. So it was a full sample of all of the children. Most of them, many of them have been in care for more than 10 years. They are going to exit their childhood in care without any papers or documentation and without any status to stay in South Africa legally. And so they are literally in limbo and at risk of being either stateless or being deported because of the lack of reunification possibilities where there is still a parent or relative in South Africa, or where contact has been lost, there is no reunification possibility, and neither adoption nor foster care is seemingly possible. So that study needs to be undertaken with respect to every single child in the alternative care system in this country. The drop in adoption figures since 2010 is an obvious cause for concern, as the CSOs pointed out, in the context of the large number of children who are without parental care. I would advocate for the need for a DSD, maybe UNICEF-funded project to implement the 2009 UN guidelines on alternative care, which overhaul the entire system, as has been done in Malawi and in Rwanda. It is not impossible given the fact that they have far less resources than we have. In Malawi, they found that 85% of the children in the care system in child and youth care centres were girls, because girls get thrown away because they're not very valuable. And a good percentage of them were not even Malawians, they were from Mozambique, which explains quite a lot as to why children remain in the alternative care system without being reunified. I would argue that there's a strong impetus for an investigation into the administrative bottlenecks that the CSOs have alluded to and which the figures seem to bear out. But I'm not laying the blame entirely at the door of DSD. I come from the Western Cape, where I meet students who are social workers regularly. We have to encounter some pretty difficult magistrates working in the children's courts. Anybody from the Western Cape will know exactly who I'm talking about. On an individual basis. And there has to be a proper engagement here with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, or the Judicial Training Institute, which is now taking over all the training of judicial officers for what it's worth. I didn't say that, but I did. Nearly done. I believe that that South Africa needs to revive its leadership role in the region. With respect to the SADC in particular, I think it will be highly welcomed by the Permanent Bureau, and I think we learn as much in the process from what's going on in other countries as they do from us, because very often there are similar issues that arise. There are also initiatives of the Institute for Social Services in Geneva, which we are kind of on the outside of. There's a huge project on kafala as a means of adoption under Islam. There's a huge project on illegal adoption practices and best practices in combating illegal adoption. We need to be engaged with that. And then ratification of the 1996 convention. We've ratified the Abduction Convention and the Adoption Convention, but there are two remaining conventions, namely the Child Protection one and the Recovery of Child Maintenance across borders, which is less relevant to this country. But child protection is very important in the context of cross-border foster care, in the context of cross-border child protection, which obviously comes up when we have large populations of migrant children. Then my final slide. The reporting cycle under the African Children's Charter is a 3-year cycle, which means our next report is around the corner. And I therefore suggest that there should be some initiative in the department to plan for the next reporting cycle and to plan particularly, my last bullet, for improved data collection. And data collection doesn't just arise in this area, it arises in the area of children with disabilities, it arises in the area of refugee and migrant children, it arises all over the place. But this is something that is much more manageable than trying to find out the numbers of unaccompanied migrant children in this country, which is an impossibility. I know because I was asked to do it, and it's short of conducting a personal census of every single village in the country, it's not possible. But this is one field where we really can improve data and present a good picture next time the report comes around. Thank you.